I still remember the day Daniel left home. The entire church compound felt different that morning. Quieter, almost like the air itself knew something none of us did. Daniel wasn't just any boy, he was the pastor's son. The one everyone believed would grow up to preach, to lead, to be an example. When his admission letter came from the university in Edo State, the celebration lasted for days. People hugged him like he had already become a success story. But standing there that morning, watching him pack his bags into the bus, I noticed something no one else seemed to see. Daniel was smiling, but it wasn't the kind of smile that comes from peace. It was the kind that comes from pressure. His mother held his hands tightly, whispering prayers under her breath as if trying to bind him to heaven before the world could touch him. His father anointed his head with oil right there by the roadside, declaring protection, favor, and destiny over his life. Everyone said, "God is with you." But as the bus engine started, Daniel looked back one last time, and for a split second, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of school, not fear of the future. It was the fear of someone stepping into a world he didn't fully understand. The bus pulled away. His parents waved until it disappeared. The church members rejoiced, but I couldn't shake the feeling in my chest. Because sometimes, the journey that looks like a blessing at the beginning is the same road that leads someone straight into darkness. And that was the last time I saw Daniel as an innocent boy. When Daniel arrived on campus, everything changed faster than anyone back home could imagine. I didn't see it myself at first, but later, when I heard the stories from those who were there, the pattern became painfully clear. At home, Daniel had always lived under watchful eyes. Parents, church members, neighbors who reported everything. But in Edo, no one knew him. No one cared whose son he was. And for the first time in his life, Daniel tasted freedom. At first it was harmless, late-night conversations in the hostel, new friends laughing loudly in corridors, music blasting from rooms where nobody slept before midnight. Then came the invitations. Just come hang out. Nothing serious. You don't have to do anything. That's how it always starts. One night turned into two turned into weekends. Soon Daniel was in places he had never imagined entering. Smoky lounges, dimly lit clubs, crowded parties where nobody asked questions. I was told the first time he held a cigarette, he coughed so badly everyone laughed. By the third time, he didn't cough at all. The first drink burned his throat. The next one didn't. And before long, Daniel wasn't just following the crowd. He was becoming part of it. From a distance, it looked like he was finally enjoying life. But those who watched closely said something else had begun to change. His laughter became louder, but emptier. His confidence grew, but it felt forced. And somewhere between the music, the smoke, and the flashing lights, Daniel stopped being the boy who left home with prayers on his head and started becoming someone none of us recognized. Looking back now, I realized that was the moment everything truly began. Because freedom doesn't destroy a man in one night. It does it slowly until he forgets who he was before he tasted it. Every downfall has a moment where someone tries to stop it. Daniel's moment came sooner than he realized. His roommate at the time, Mark, wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, wasn't the type to judge anyone, but he watched people, and he watched Daniel closely. At first, Mark thought Daniel was just adjusting to campus life. Everyone changes a little when they leave home. But Daniel wasn't just changing, he was drifting. Late nights became normal. Morning classes became optional. The Bible that used to sit on his desk slowly disappeared into his bag, untouched. One evening, after Daniel stumbled back into the hostel smelling of alcohol and smoke, Mark finally spoke. Not angrily, not loudly, just quietly. He asked Daniel one simple question. Is this really the life you came here to live? I heard later that Daniel laughed it off, said he knew what he was doing, said he wasn't a child, said he could stop any time he wanted. Mark didn't argue. He just told him something that would later echo louder than anyone expected. Be careful who you walk with, because some paths don't let you return the same person. Daniel shrugged it off like it meant nothing. And maybe to him it didn't. Because the dangerous thing about warnings is that they rarely sound urgent when you first hear them. They only become frightening after it's too late to listen. And that night, Daniel left the hostel again. Mark watched him go. And from what I was told, he shook his head slowly, like someone who already knew how the story would end. I remember the night Daniel crossed a line he would never come back from. He had always been curious, adventurous, maybe even reckless. But that night, his curiosity turned dangerous. It started innocently. A few new friends invited him to a gathering. They called it a special club, something secret, something powerful. Daniel laughed when they mentioned rituals and oaths, thinking it was all just games and thrill. But as he stepped into the dimly lit room, I felt a chill from a distance. Candlelight flickered against the walls, casting shadows that seemed alive. Strange symbols were drawn on the floor, and the air carried a weight that made my chest tighten just imagining it. Daniel's eyes glimmered, not with fear, but with excitement. Every whisper of the group seemed to pull him in. Every gesture of secrecy made him feel important. That night, the initiation began. Daniel knelt, reciting words he didn't fully understand, swearing loyalty to a force he had never met. As an eyewitness, I could feel the shift. A boy once innocent, full of faith and light, was slowly becoming someone else. The boy who prayed for exams, who listened to his parents, who smiled without worry, that boy was gone. From that night on, Daniel's life became a series of shadows. He started avoiding his Christian friends, stopped answering calls from home, and his laughter changed, louder, emptier, more hollow. And I knew, watching from afar, that this was no longer just fun or rebellion. This was a path that rarely leads anyone back. That night, Daniel disappeared into the city like a shadow, chasing freedom. The campus pulsed with music, smoke, and laughter. I wasn't there personally, but those who were there tell stories I still can't forget. Daniel was no longer just experimenting. He was consumed. He moved from one dimly lit club to another, drinks in hand, letting the world drag him farther away from the life he once knew. I heard whispers about that night, about how the lights flickered as if the room itself disapproved, about the uneasy feeling that followed him like a shadow no one could see. And then there was the dream. That night, after stumbling back to his dorm, Daniel fell asleep on the thin mattress. What he experienced was something no one could describe to him. Shadows moved like people, voices murmured warnings in tongues he didn't understand, and a cold hand seemed to grip his chest, squeezing tightly enough to wake his heart before he even opened his eyes. When he awoke, drenched in sweat, his conscience screamed at him. But Daniel, he brushed it aside. He told himself it was just a dream, a trick of his mind. The night's thrill drowned out the warning, and so he repeated it. Late nights, reckless laughter, drinking, clubbing, the allure of danger, each step heavier than the last, each choice pulling him farther from the boy who had left home with prayers on his head. I remember thinking, freedom like this always comes with a price. And sometimes you don't realize it until it's far too late. I'll never forget the day Daniel's mother came to campus. She arrived quietly, almost as if she was walking through a dream she didn't want to wake from. I wasn't there personally, but those who saw her moved with a mixture of hope and fear, the kind of hope only a mother carries for a child she senses is drifting too far away. Daniel greeted her with a smile that was rehearsed, polished, perfect. From the outside, he looked like the son she had raised, polite, attentive, cheerful. But mothers see things others can't. She held his hands and prayed quietly, not loudly, not dramatically, just soft words that seemed to pierce the air.
She prayed for protection, for guidance, for the boy she knew was still in there somewhere. Daniel nodded, smiled, even laughed at a few jokes, but something in the room shifted subtly. I could almost see it, a tension in his shoulders, a shadow behind his eyes that even his mother's prayers couldn't reach. Before leaving, she pressed a small handkerchief into his pocket and whispered, "Remember who you are, my son. Never forget where you come from." And then she was gone. Those who watched said she left silently, tears held back by the strength only mothers possess. But that day, something was left behind in the room. Not her presence, but a quiet warning. Daniel walked away smiling, yet I could see it. The boy who had once carried faith and innocence was now walking a line darker than she could ever imagine. It wasn't until the dreams started coming back, darker this time, that Daniel truly felt the weight of his choices. I remember hearing about the night clearly. He woke suddenly, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding as if trying to escape his chest. Shadows crawled along the walls of his dorm room, whispers lingering in the corners. He saw himself, the boy he used to be, staring back, accusing him silently. And yet, he still refused to listen. The cult had pulled him in deep. Every secret meeting, every ritual, every act of defiance strengthened the chains around him. He had done things he never imagined doing, rationalized as part of belonging, as if committing small sins would somehow shield him from the consequences. His conscience screamed in quiet moments, but pride and fear drowned it out. The boy who once studied faithfully, who once prayed before exams, who once listened to his parents' warnings, he was almost gone. Even from afar, watching, you could feel the tension building, the excitement, the thrill, the false sense of power. It all hid the darkness creeping closer. And I remember thinking, this is the moment where the path becomes irreversible, where every choice from here on will either destroy him completely or somehow force him back to the light he's been fleeing. But Daniel, he kept walking deeper into shadows, unaware of the storm that was quietly gathering around him. Daniel was no longer the boy who left home full of prayers and hope. I remember the day clearly, or at least what people who saw him told me. His grades were slipping, lectures missed, assignments forgotten. Friends he had once laughed with now gave him sideways glances, unsure who he had become. The calls from home went unanswered. His father's voice on the phone, firm and concerned, ended in frustration. Daniel's words were sharp, defensive, and angry. A boy who once respected authority had turned into someone unrecognizable. He stopped returning messages from his Christian friends. He distanced himself from the people who cared, the ones who had tried to guide him. I heard him say later to someone who knew him from the cult, They don't understand me. I'm doing what I need to do to survive, to belong. And in that single line, you could see the truth. Daniel had lost himself. From the outside, it looked like freedom, but from close by, watching, you could feel the emptiness growing. A boy who had promise, talent, and faith was now trapped in isolation. A trap he built himself. I remember thinking, some paths are easy to step onto, but impossible to step back from once the darkness takes hold. It was a night like any other, but something about it felt wrong. Daniel was returning from one of the cult meetings, walking along the dimly lit path that cut across campus. The air was thick, heavy, as if warning him that danger lurked closer than he realized. From the shadows there appeared figures moving silently, almost like ghosts. Before he could react, they struck. The attack was brutal. Daniel fell to the ground, his body battered, pain exploding in every part of him. I wasn't there, but the screams reached people across the campus. Friends tried to help, but by the time anyone arrived, he was broken, bruised, bloodied, and shaken to his core. He was rushed to the hospital, but the attack did more than injure his body. It shook something deep inside him. The first real crack in the walls he had built around himself. For the first time, the consequences of his choices weren't abstract. They weren't whispers in dreams or warnings from friends. They were real, physical, unforgiving. And even then, he didn't fully understand that this was only the beginning. Because when a boy walks too far into darkness, sometimes the first fall is only a warning of the storms that are still to come. When Daniel finally opened his eyes in the hospital, the world felt smaller. His friends had vanished. The faces that once laughed with him, that once encouraged him to follow the thrill, were gone. The cult members were distant now, some avoiding him, some watching silently as if measuring his worth. For the first time, Daniel felt the weight of his choices. Every reckless night, every lie, every betrayal of his own conscience pressed down on him. He was alone, completely. I remember hearing him whisper to himself, voice shaky, almost inaudible, "What have I done?" Even as guilt gnawed at him, pride still chained his heart. He didn't return to faith. He didn't call home. He just lay there staring at the ceiling, watching shadows move, haunted by the faces of people he had hurt. This was the moment the boy realized the world he had built with lies and rebellion offered no safety. Only isolation, only regret, only a quiet, creeping fear that maybe it was too late to turn back. And yet, even in that moment, I could see it flickering, a small, fragile spark of awareness, a tiny thread that could pull him back to the light. But awareness alone isn't enough. It must be acted upon. Daniel's body was weak, broken from the attacks, but it was his spirit that carried the heaviest wounds. I remember the room at the hospital, quiet, almost unbearably still. His parents stood beside him, faces pale, hearts heavy with worry. They didn't yet know the full weight of what Daniel had done. And then he spoke. Every word was a dagger, every confession a thunderclap that seemed to shake the walls. He spoke about the nights he had lost himself, about the choices that led him down dangerous paths. He spoke of the cult, the rituals, the lies, the crimes. He spoke of betrayal, and even worse, of the people he had hurt in ways he could never undo. His mother's hands shook as she covered her face. His father gripped the edge of the bed, knuckles white, struggling to keep from collapsing. For Daniel, the release of truth came with agony. For his parents, the truth cut sharper than any sword. And yet, as the confessions poured out, I could feel something shift in the room. Not relief, not forgiveness yet, but honesty. Raw, painful honesty. It was the moment Daniel finally faced himself, stripped of pride, stripped of lies, stripped of all illusions. And as an eyewitness to that moment, I knew there was no turning back from truth once it has been fully spoken. It was quiet that afternoon, almost eerily so. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic, but beneath it, tension hung in the air like a storm ready to break.
Daniel lay in the bed, pale, broken, guilt etched into every line of his face. His parents sat close, holding his hands, hoping, praying for some sign of redemption. And then the door opened. She walked in, a woman he had once harmed, the same one he had wronged in ways he could never take back, and with her, a child. Time seemed to stop, every breath held, every heartbeat loud in the stillness. I could feel the shock from the other side of the room, like it struck the floor first and then climbed into our chests. The woman's eyes met Daniel's, no words yet, just the weight of truth. Daniel's parents froze, disbelief and horror etched on their faces. The gravity of his actions, the reality of the lives he had touched, all came crashing into the room at once. And in that moment, Daniel finally understood. Not in theory, not in a whisper, but in full, terrifying, irreversible clarity. The boy who once left home with prayers on his head now faced the consequences of every choice he had made, staring him directly in the eyes, carried in the arms of innocence he had harmed. There were no excuses left, no hiding, no pretending, and as the room fell into stunned silence, I realized some lessons are learned only through the most devastating truth. The hospital room was heavy with grief and silence, broken only by Daniel's shallow breathing. For the first time in years, he truly looked inward. The pride, the defiance, the thrill of rebellion, all of it crumbled in the shadow of what he had done. I could feel it even from across the room. The boy who once laughed with innocence, who once carried faith and hope, was finally confronting himself. He whispered apologies, not just to his parents, but to the lives he had harmed. His words trembled, raw and sincere, carrying the weight of guilt that had grown for years. His parents, tears streaming, held him close. Forgiveness mingled with heartbreak. It wasn't a celebration, it wasn't relief. It was a fragile peace, the kind that comes when truth is finally faced and accepted. In that moment, I realized something profound. Redemption doesn't erase the past. It doesn't undo the consequences, but it restores the soul. Even for a boy who had wandered so far into darkness, even for Daniel, a flicker of light returned. And for those few moments, the world outside the hospital, the noise, the chaos, the temptations, didn't matter. All that remained was truth, confession, and the fragile, trembling grace of redemption. The hospital room felt colder that day. Daniel's breaths were shallow, uneven, each one a reminder of how fragile life had become. His parents held his hands, refusing to let go, their tears falling freely, unashamed. I could see it, the weight of years, of warnings ignored, of choices made and consequences endured, pressed down on every face in that room. Friends, those who remained, stood at a distance, silent, shame and grief etched into their expressions. The laughter and camaraderie that once surrounded Daniel had vanished. Only silence remained, thick and suffocating. And then, in that stillness, Daniel's eyes fluttered open one last time. There was sorrow there, regret, a lifetime of decisions flashing through moments he no longer had. He whispered to his parents, barely audible, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And then, finally, he was gone. The room fell into a silence so heavy it pressed against your chest. It was a silence that screamed lessons too late learned. I could feel the weight of his story hanging over the campus, over the friends who had followed him, over anyone who might listen. Choices have consequences. Temptation has a price, and sometimes the cost is more than one life can bear. Daniel's life ended that day, but the echoes of his life, the choices he made, the temptations he chased, the warnings he ignored, spread across the campus like a cautionary tale written in real blood and tears. I watched from the edges as his friends, those who once laughed and followed him, began to pause. They reconsidered the paths they were walking, the shortcuts they were taking, the lies they were telling themselves. His parents mourned deeply, but in their grief, they shared his story with others. They spoke not just of sorrow, but of the lessons their son left behind. The danger of turning away from the guidance of those who love you. The destructive lure of freedom without wisdom. The heavy price of choices made in darkness. And though Daniel himself never returned fully to the light, his life became a message, a reminder, a warning. Some paths may look exciting, glamorous, and powerful, but the shadows that follow often arrive when you least expect them, when it's too late to turn back. Daniel's legacy is simple, yet haunting. Follow the right path. Listen to warnings. Do not ignore the light, because sometimes the price of ignoring it is everything.